How does war affect the mental health of Kentucky veterans and their families?
PTSD is a very common mental illness found in veterans after war. Many veterans struggle to return to a normal life. It also changes the dynamics within the family of that veteran. An article called Establishing a Methodology to Examine the Effects of War Zone PTSD on the Family talks about the struggles of both the veteran and their families. PTSD is a very common disease for veterans after going on deployments to war zone areas. PTSD does not only affect them, but it also affects their families because the veterans are not able to continue living a normal life. They find it hard to get out of the war zone mindset and often don't feel right just living a normal life back in the U.S. 43% of soldiers come back from deployments with PTSD. This causes many family issues, like constant fighting between family members, because the veteran has had a hard time returning to daily life. Often, many times, families end up separating because of the fighting between family members, and it continues to get worse, and they do not know how to resolve them.
The image shown is of Desert Storm veteran David Sassman of Mayfield, Kentucky, receiving Ollie, his 2-year-old Labrador Retriever. Ollie had been trained to be a service dog for David by Lyon County American Legion Post 68. This program is funded off of a $12,000 grant from the Kentucky Veterans Association. Veterans like David have been benefited from owning service dogs, and the Lyon County Legion Post plans to help many more veterans, just like David. Thousands of veterans across America have service dogs. These service dogs help alleviate the PTSD symptoms that these veterans have. David Sassman, a Desert Storm veteran, said, quote, "He's good for me because I kind of become really idle, so he'll get me up and moving, which is really what I need anyway. Makes me feel younger too. In times when I struggle with anxiety, depression, whatever, he's going to pick up on that. It's evident that war changes a man or woman, whether for the better or worse. However, no matter what the case, programs like this greatly benefit veterans like David Sassman with PTSD."
I'm here with my roommate, Kalen LeBrick, whose father is a veteran of the United States Armed Forces. He's going to give us a brief insight as to how his father's service has impacted himself and his family. How long has your family lived in Kentucky?
As long as I can remember. I was born in Kentucky.
What was your dad's job while he served?
He was an attack helicopter pilot.
Where did he serve?
The Marine Corps.
What branch?
He was in the Marine Corps, but he served out of Pensacola, Florida.
How long did he serve in the Marines?
He went on 4 combat tours.
Where?
Iraq and Afghanistan.
Do you know what made him want to serve?
He got recruited out after he played college football and decided that he wanted to serve.
Where did he play college football?
At Illinois College.
So talking about his service overall and then after his service, how did his service affect you personally?
Well, being from a military family, having to go through and deal with any problems he might be having, relating to what he had seen and stuff like that, and, stuff like that.
What kind of mental stress and hardships does this put on you and your family?
Well, it's, we don't really talk about it too much because he doesn't like to talk about it, but I've heard some stories from him, so
it's safe to assume that it's a pretty sensitive topic for him?
Definitely.
Did he ever experience any kind of PTSD that you know of?
A little bit when he got out. My mom didn't really tell me much about it, but to this day, he still doesn't like when anyone puts hands on his shoulders or neck area.
Okay. After growing up in a military family, have you ever considered enlisting or serving?
I have considered. I decided against it after talking to my dad about it, but I did consider it at one point.
What brings you? What did he say to talk you out of it, or what brings you to this answer?
He just said that it's a hard path to even join the military, and then once you get in, the things that you might see or the things you might have to do, you may never be able to live down.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Sir.
Doug Boyd's The Wisdom Project podcast, Veteran Stories, begins with Doug explaining the importance of Veterans Day in America. Opinions on why it is important to not only remember the veterans, but to also listen to what they have to say about their time in the military is discussed. So on Veterans Day, instead of watching a war movie in honor of veterans, Doug visits the UK archives and finds 2 World War II veterans and listens to their stories. The first veteran he listens to, Jess Beasley, shares his experiences from D-Day. Jess talks about how he thought of his family back home in Kentucky and wondered if he would ever see them again. The focus of the podcast shifts from Jess Beasley to Lewis Bowers, the second veteran, to share stories. Bowers talks about his personal experiences after D-Day, but still during the war. Lewis Bowers shares 2 powerful stories from the war with Doug. The podcast goes in depth into the stories of 2 veterans interviewed. One story that stuck out for Lewis Bowers is about how he used to hunt often, but cannot shoot guns anymore because of the trauma experienced during the war. This shows he was deeply affected by what he experienced during the war. This is just one of many veterans that has been affected by the war. Many of the troops have more severe symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Each man and woman has a different experience during their time at war. In the article, An American Soldier Remembers Omaha Beach, Chuck Hurlbut describes his experience during D-Day. He describes the atmosphere on board the boat headed toward Omaha Beach. He talks about the change of mood once the men step onto the boats and realize where they were headed. Chuck Hurlbut describes the atmosphere as going from jovial to serious. He talks about the assault craft that took him to the beach as a big rubber raft full of explosives. Once the men make it to the beach, they exit the assault craft. He stays near the boat to have access to the explosives, but the Germans shoot at the boat and it completely explodes. Quote, all of a sudden a mortar comes over, hits the raft, and the whole goddamn thing blows up. I remember seeing thick black smoke and debris flying and hearing a loud bang, but I guess it blacked me out. End quote. He looked around and was no longer with his troop. He had to survive D-Day alone. He then saw all the other hundreds of men like him, hiding behind the sand dunes on the beach, who were trying to survive D-Day as well. He realized he was not the only man alone. This source is very important. The veteran Chuck Hurlbut talks of his time at D-Day and the catastrophe that took place. He talks about the men's mood changing once they realized they were headed to the beaches. This shows the fear these men had when having to go and fight against the Germans. Once at the beach, the explosion occurred. Because of the explosion, he was left all alone to try and survive. It left him dazed and confused. He went to take cover and saw all of the other soldiers. They were injured, some with no helmets and some with no rifles. All of the dead and wounded men he saw that day left an effect on him that would stick with him forever. The image shown is a photo taken by Robert Capa on June 6, 1944. It shows the U.S. troops invading one of the beaches of Normandy. In the photo, we see boats and supplies in the background and U.S. soldiers holding weapons heading toward the beach. The men were dropped off in water up to their knees. You can see some men struggling, holding their heavy equipment, and others fighting through to make it through the water onto land. This photo is important because it shows the darkness and sadness of this day. Getting to the beach was challenging for these men, as you see them falling in the water trying to get to land. This black and white photo looks very gloomy. You see the gunpowder and smoke-filled air the men had to fight through. The photo shows some things the soldiers experienced during their time at D-Day. It shows the water, the beach in the middle, and the hills in the background, showing the different layers of struggle the soldiers would have to face in order to succeed.
In an interview with Vietnam veteran Stan Girding, he stated that life after war was, quote, extremely tough, end quote. Stan served in the Navy as a medic and earned not 1, but 2 Purple Hearts while in Vietnam. He was drafted when he was under the age of 21, and after his 4 years of service, he went home. Every war has different effects on the nation and its reaction. In Stan's situation, post-Vietnam was the opposite of a coming home parade. America's overall feeling about Vietnam was that we shouldn't even be in it. He said when he first got back home, there wasn't much talking. None of his family members asked any questions. He did not want to discuss anything he saw. Stan said, quote, I came home to a hostile country, and we even got spit on by our own people. That was tough. I just wanted people to understand, end quote. He stated that he had nightmares for 3 years. They were so bad, he would wake up screaming and sweating. While all of this was going on, he tried to continue on with things by getting his old job back at Kroger. He said that his whole mind was changed. So after 2 years of trying to continue on with things, he realized that he wanted to go back into the Navy. When I asked him how he dealt with all of this, he responded, quote, I sat down with different guys that went through similar things, and we tried to talk things through. When I got out of the Navy, I knew something was still messed up. It bothered me, so I told my wife that I'm going to start recording my story. I would record myself in the car on the way to work and at home, end quote. After he retired, he began writing about his recordings and his journey. He said that it was very therapeutic. His writings then led to him publishing his book called The Nam Doc, A Navy Corpsman's Story. This was his way of letting people know what he and others went through at war.
The image we have here was captured by photographer Bruce Drake at a World War II memorial ceremony in Normandy, France, on June 6, 2014. This date also happened to be the 70th anniversary of D-Day, the day that the Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. The article that came along with the image focused on how, as of 2014, there are only 1.3 million veterans who actually fought in World War II that are still alive, according to Bruce Drake. Several veterans and active duty military members are seen saluting while the United States national anthem is played. All of the men in the picture have somber looks to them. One of the men in the image shows just how difficult it is to relive such a difficult time. He is seen in the bottom right corner with his head down, looking somewhat depressed. This image helps answer our research question by showing just how dedicated these veterans are to fighting for what they believe in, regardless of the pain that they suffered to achieve it. One veteran in the top left of the image is using a cane to help him stand. This shows that even though he needs assistance, he is willing to stand for what he believes in. Regardless of the age of the veterans, they are still showing a great amount of respect towards the country. Any person that looks at this image can imagine what these soldiers have been through. The mood of the image is somber as these men have a look of sad, still pride on their faces. The man in the bottom right corner of the image, with his head down, has a painful expression on his face. One can only imagine the brutality of the memories coursing through his mind.
In conclusion, war affects the mental health of both the veterans and their families. It's often very hard for the veterans who have PTSD to return to a normal life, which adds on to the stress of the family. Veterans see all types of horrific things while they're on deployments, which leads to PTSD and the trouble of returning back home.